I wanted to bring something up that and I don't remember who first mentioned it, but more than one of you did. And it's not so much content of Hegel in this book, but rather process or style. It seems like he cycles back many times. Like you think like, okay, X is Y, Y is Z, Z is A, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, it sounds like he's talking about what he started to talk about a number of pages ago. And the more I was thinking about that, the more I was thinking about, well, wait a second, maybe that's his point. I mean, it may not be done with a lucidity that someone in the 20th century would write it, but maybe he's saying something about the more than relationships of the different terms he's talking about. Anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. So I'm guessing, actually Hunter said something a while back that he repeats himself a lot, and some of that might be for pedagogical purposes because he's trying to kind of talk about the same things in different contexts to help us get a handle on it. But what the other thing I've assumed is that is because this is all part of the dialectic, and the dialectic is this moving process where ideas, like one idea gives birth to another idea, which then negates the first and generates a third, and that. So what I don't know, I've noticed that too, and maybe both of these is wrong, but I don't know if he's just showing, look, like the dialectic worked back there and generated this, now you can see it doing the same thing here. Or is it that, like you said, that somehow those earlier moments, as he might call them, actually do re-emerge in a later stage? So I don't know. I've assumed that it's more or less intentional, perhaps both pedagogical and also a feature of the way dialectic works. But I'm unsure. I'm because I have such a tenuous grasp of the way this dialectic works that I'm very hesitant to say, well, this is an example of him bringing the dialectic in, because I'm never sure what that means. Hey, Joseph, we really just got started because we were just flapping our jaws for half an hour. So.
Oh, good, because yeah, work's been work, so fun. Yeah, that stored procedure I said not to implement in production last night? Yeah, they did it anyway, and yeah, well, why not test code in production? That's the best fucking way to do it. Oh shit! Oh, sorry. I'm my bad. Do it live. Test all code in production. Who needs staging or testing environments? It's the fun way. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm a little bitter. So good. Hegel.
There's no obligation for you to be here either. I just sent you a note just in case you'd forgotten. But
oh no, yeah, no, I appreciate
it.
Yeah, no. Well, as a morally conscious being that knows that duty is in my action, I know that I'm not obligated to be here, but you can recognize my being through language so that my duty exhibits itself phenomenologically. So let's do this.
Joseph, we were just talking about Hegel's habit of when he starts going on the logic of his argument seems to end where he started, with terminology or things. And what Neva was saying is this him showing how the dialectic works? Is it pedagogical, or is it, we were just trying to, because a couple of you had mentioned that more than once, that he'll use these terms and you think, okay, I'm getting it, but then he'll say a term that he had started with, so it seems circular.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Kalkovich is pretty adamant that Hegel is using the same terms to reiterate the sublation process, so that that it's more of a development more than you know, where you can go back and review. So it's funny because in the Logic of Desire, prior to reading this, because at least for me, reading Hegel without a secondary source, I felt kind of floundering. And in Logic of Desire, he went over just that. He mentioned again, Hegel's doing this to reiterate that this is less of a ascension and more of kind of like a dynamic interweaving of all the concepts that we've learned together, so that we can review and know that the act of sublation is preserving while building, not just completely moving forward. So I noticed that in the reading, but only because of Kalkovich, not on my own intelligence by any way.
I think of the dialectic as being, I don't know if it's circular, but something like that, because you have these movements kind of flowing in and out of one another. And so I don't think he would say it's circular in the sense of circular well, I don't know, circular logic. Maybe he would, since he he says the principle of non-contradiction is something we shouldn't worry about. So maybe circularity isn't either. But I do think of, and then, which I don't understand this illustration, frankly, sorry, Hunter, but, Hunter's got this illustration of a Mobius strip. I don't really understand what that's supposed to show, but that has a kind of circularity to it as well. So I think of the dialectic as having something like a circular dynamic to it, which maybe is one reason these things keep bouncing back at us.
That's what Kalkovich does. I'll see if I can find something for it, but he uses circles to show that it's not. And he even says very similar to what you said, in that it's not a true circular. It's more of like a dynamic of interweaving. I don't know if you can see it, but there's these little tiny, like, it's hard to show. Let me see if I can find this in JPEG form, but there's these little tiny circles going back and forth. So it is kind of like what Hunter said about the Mobius. It's not like you're building out. It's more like as you build out, remember, you have to preserve. It's like that whole individual and universal thing. So, and because I'm a visual learner, that really helped me. I'll see if I can find that online really quick.
So is some of MC Escher's art Hegelian?
I love MC Escher. Maybe.
Yes, I'll say a few things. First, I think that to me, the dialectic, the word dialectic, it conjures a series of different images and feelings and general notions in my mind. And some of those would be, like Nevitt pointed out, this sort of Mobius strip. And I'll get into that in a second. I really do think that there is value in horror and disgust and frustration and hunger and gassiness. I just get all, I just totally get blown off. And I think of another thing. I think of this three-part movement, and this is a very banal illustration, but this is, if I were to imagine, I try to imagine the dialectic in two different ways. First off, in this sense that I am a subject experiencing an object within a symbolic system or structure, I confront this term in my experience, and I can describe to you guys and to myself what happens to that term before my very eyes, right? Then on a different note, in a different context, using a different sort of framework, I can then try to analyze what happened to that thing and what that implies. And that, I think, is the split between the notion of the dialectic in this sort of what does it do to a concept sort of way, versus this other notion, this MC Escher dialectic, which is, I know it sounds silly, but the unorientable space of dialectical thought and thinking. I think that dialectical thinking or dialectical cognition operates within, or maybe not even within, but centered around or founded on or constituted by this unorientability, this unorientable space, where the notion of progress or definitive culmination kind of disappears, where the notion of some sort of omega point where we reach the zenith of human knowledge and like oh, we did it, yes, absolute knowing. It's like that is so far and away from where I think just try and invert that. Just think of the worst possible situation you could be in, just absolute ignorance of everything. It's like that's never mind that. The two ways that I think of the dialectic operating are, if I'm analyzing the way that the object is affected, I would say that there is a term, there is some sort of term posited. There's some sort of term, all right, in my dialectical analysis or whatever. And this term could be whatever. It could be formalism. It could be empiricism. It could be whatever. And then that term, I imagine as like a physical object. This is like I said, a very banal illustration, but I imagine it collapsing, like imagine that the term is like an egg, that you see the shell break, and then you imagine that there's yolk inside that you couldn't see. Oh, I finally get to see inside of the egg and see its hidden substantial content, i.e. the yolk, right? The eggshell cracks, and then inside of it there is no yolk. There's just this void, this empty space, this lack of substance. And this lack or this emptiness or this void that's inside the thing is its own term. Because then I can say, I don't just say there is an egg and that's it. There is, and then the eggshell cracks and I see what's inside of it. And I say, it's still just a single solitary egg with nothing else moving on. No, now I know that it's an egg that is hollow. I know that it is an egg that is hollow and therefore has a void in it, has an emptiness in it. There is something in the world or an experiencer that can be integrated into my analysis that is not egg. And in fact, not egg doesn't just happen to be what circles around the egg at all times. The entirety of the world that is not the egg is technically not egg. That's fine, but any idiot can say that, I think, is Hegel's point. Any Johnny come lately can point out that a thing is what it is because it's not something else. But I think he would say further that the mystery, the secret, the crazy part is that the not egg is inside of the egg. The not this is inside, the not empiricism is inside of empiricism. Where formalism, if we take that as our first term, it collapses. It stops functioning at a certain point. Where does it collapse? Where we don't have the forms to delineate a particular object, term, or phenomenon, right? And what do we call that phenomenon if we don't have a purely formal explanation for it, but matter? Wherever formality and formalism fails, matter appears, right? And matter, or materialism, thus, empiricism, is this expression, this coming to life of the failed points, the failed attempts at formalism to cover everything. Formalism tries its best and then fails. And these particular points where it fails, we call those empiricism or materialism. You know what I mean? And then the point of Hegel's analysis is to say, okay, so now we have these two terms, the thing and the places where it fails, the places where it collapses or breaks down and doesn't work. And we also happen to call those places where it fails or breaks down or doesn't work, we call those something else. In fact, we happen to call them usually something that we would call its opposite. Its opposite happens to be what happens when it fails. When formalism fails, empiricism steps in and says, I got this. What is left, if we have these two things, the thing and its void, or the thing and its failure, formalism and its failures, or its weak points, its failed attempts, we have the difference between the two. We suddenly have this posited difference between formalism and empiricism, between egg and not egg, between masculine and the collapsed failure of the masculine, which is feminine, you know, whatever, if you want it, but that's a really weird psychoanalytic sex talk. But this first term collapses or fails, and then the places where it fails give rise to this opposing tendency. And this opposing tendency is thus at the core of the first term, because the first term only operates on this ground of constantly failing. Is seeing the inside of the egg equivalent to trying to understand the being of something? Yes, in fact, actually, yes, trying to see the inside of the egg to see the yolk is like when I'm trying to understand something, and my understanding, this is where Hegel comes from in his separation between reason and understanding, where understanding has this constitutive feature to itself, which is an otherworldly beyond that it can't understand. I look at my phone or my hand or my life or my body or an object in front of me, and I assume in my understanding that there is some aspect to it that I could never understand. It's just too complex. It's just too beautiful, too sensuous, too supple, too flesh-like or deep in character or whatever bullshit. It is always going to, in some part, elude my grasp. Hegel puts forward, I think, at certain other points in this text, that reason, if we could try and describe reason as different from understanding, it would be that reason is in a way understanding without its constituted illusion of an elusive character to the thing that it's trying to understand. Reason is understanding without any constitutive mist beyond realm. Understanding means or wants to approach the subject and grasp its substantial content, but always feels that its substantial content eludes understanding. The illusion of understanding, the fundamental illusion of understanding, is that its analytic power is merely an abstraction. It's just this contingent abstraction from what's going on. Reason is understanding in its positive aspect, in a way. Reason is, and this is where the negation of the negation comes from. It all comes together in this really crazy thing where reason is understanding in its positive aspect, because reason is understanding a thing without the assumption that there's some sort of substantial character that is eluding my understanding. I recognize that there is not, or the reason assumes that there is not some constitutive, substantive, elusive secret hidden inside the egg. It assumes that it's okay, and a same way to say this, like an equivalent way to say this, is that understanding sees its analytic power or its analytic effort as this contingent abstraction. There's this noumenal thing that I'm coming in and fucking with and trying to dig into. And Kant would say, no, you see, it's noumenal. It's got the in itself. You can't get there, you can't get any farther. No, right? And this is founded on this assumption that analyzing, understanding, trying to understand is just this detached abstraction from the substantial thing as it stands, right? Reason, on the other hand, is the recognition or the assumption that my analytic power is not merely an abstraction from present reality or from the term that I'm trying to understand, but that it is a part of the thing. my analytic capacity and my reasoning and my thinking about the thing are in the thing. The thing is in me in the same sense that I am in the thing. Substance is subject. It goes both ways. Not only am I the subject, substance, because I'm made of substance, I'm physically made out of universal matter, but also substance is subject in the sense that the only possible way in order to approach that substance is within this subjective horizon. And it's not that it's just this sort of failed gap game thing. It's that the two fail to reach each other and thus reach each other through shared failure. You know, the point is, you have this thing, this first term, claim that substance is a category of the understanding. How is that different from Kant's claim that substance is a category of the understanding?
So you know, I mean, the reason I ask is you were saying something like the subject, I can't remember exactly, but I'll put the way it seemed to me, the subject is substance in the sense that the subject is what imbues something with the idea that it must have substance, or that there must be some substance to it.
Yeah.
That it's the subject that is responsible for, I don't know what, assuming or requiring that there is some sort of substantial essence under, or substantial thing underneath the phenomenal properties. And you know, Kant's answer to that, maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But it seems like Kant says something similar. It's just that he says that substance is one of the categories, along with, you know, cause and plurality and unity and all these other things. Substance is one of the categories that the rational intellect uses to organize information. And so he acknowledges that substance, for example, is really in the subject. But you know, for Kant, it's in the transcendental. It's a function of the transcendental ego. And the way you were talking about substance and its relation to subject sounded real similar to that.
Yeah, and I think that it's grounded in this same sort of, at the very least, I think that. Okay, one way to say this would be that Kant didn't seek absolute knowledge, but sought the horizon that is presupposed in all engagements with any potential knowledge. And I think that his focus on the horizon, this notion that substance, yes, is part of the subject's projection, or it's subjective tools or whatever. That's the problem. I think I found the problem, and it's that Kant is willing to say that substance is a category of subject, yes, that it is this part of subjective experience or subjective intervention into reality or whatever. But the thing is, even as a part of subject, it's still a part of this transcendental ego, this trans phenomenal appearance or whatever, this. And I think that what that does is he can say that substance is a part of subject all day long, right? But he's still orienting his philosophy around this assumption that there really is, even if just functionally, a substantial aspect to reality that eludes us. And thus, our calling it substance might be subjective, but it seems like there is some, we could call it an X factor. There's some sort of hidden X factor that is eluding our grasp every time that we try to understand a thing.
So just to focus on that for just a minute. So, if I remember right, you've said things like Hegel acknowledges that, I can't remember how you put it, but it seems like you're saying that he acknowledges, like Hume's point is that we have no experience of the ground of subjectivity. In other words, whatever it is that is conscious, that does not appear in consciousness. Like that picture of, the Wittgensteinian picture where the eyeball is not in the field of vision, just like whatever is conscious is not in the field of consciousness. And I think I remember you saying that Hegel's on board with that the ground of subjectivity is not in the field of consciousness. But then, of course, I agree with what you're saying about Kant. So what Kant says then, oh, well, there must be some transcendental subject. And, for Kant, transcendental does, as you've been saying, does exactly mean that which does not appear within experience. So the whole hidden noumenal world, because sometimes people have called the transcendental ego the noumenal ego, because it is in the noumena. I mean, it is in the transcendental field in the sense of not being in the field of experience. It's elsewhere, not in the field of experience. So in what sense is Hegel not doing something similar? Maybe this is just a very roundabout way for me, again, just expressing I don't really know what he means by consciousness, because it seems like he wants to acknowledge that the subject does not have experience of the subject itself, and yet he's also rejecting, as you say, as I think pretty much every idealist after Kant tried to do, he's trying to get rid of the noumena. He's trying to get rid of this weird, mysterious thing. So how does Hegel account, for the elusiveness of the ground of subjectivity without appealing to some sort of transcendental field?
Well, I think that the notion of the transcendental field, it presupposes a field of some kind, this functional field which eludes us. And okay, I think that the most basic way to answer that is to kind of point to what I think is Hegel's, what is part of Hegel's project or his move from Kant there. And it's that I think Hegel would say that the thing which prevents my understanding of the thing. Kant would say that the thing that prevents my understanding of object, God, I don't want to say object A because that's like a psychoanalytic term, but this object, the thing that prevents my understanding of an object. What is it that prevents that? Kant would say it's the limited aspect of our perception and our understanding and our capacity. It is the discord, the fundamental gap between our subjective horizon and the full totality of a noumenal notion or thing or object or world. There is this gap between my limited subjective being versus this unlimited, truly absolute and infinite noumenal world. I am a limited little flashlight that's trying to look around in this deep, dark world. Hegel, I think, would say that the thing that prevents me from understanding that object is not my personal or my physiochemical or cognitive impairments. It is the thing itself. It is the object itself that prevents my understanding. Phenomenal perception, this is what Kant would say, phenomenal perception is radically contingent and unstable and unreliable. Those are phenomenal perception is contingent, unstable, and unreliable. And then Hegel will probably say, yes, but this is how things themselves really are. That things really are contingent, unstable, and unreliable. Our phenomenal perception is too. Yes, that doesn't produce much of a problem. That's fine. Hegel overcomes Kant. I really don't think that he overcomes Kant by insisting that things are knowable through reason as the substance of reality. I really don't think that. But I think Hegel moves beyond Kant by saying that epistemological limitation that Kant talks about, all the epistemological limitations that Kant constantly talks about, they should be given the credit of being indicative or in fact, it being kind of the same thing to say that there's an ontological impossibility. There's a fundamental, permanent, eternal epistemological limitation. But that should be reconsidered in a sense as an ontological impossibility. And yes, and I'm trying to pretend that there's no Kant, or that there's no Lacan. But yes, Dylan, ontological incompleteness. Yes, like a real ontological impossibility or incompleteness. So it's not that like Hegel is trying to use this lack, this impossibility or incompleteness, or this epistemological limitation and ontological incompleteness to gain a positive view where we suddenly have like more info, but it's to affirm the lack as thwarting all possible consistent ontologies. You know what I mean? Not to build a new ontology of lackness, but to, I think, really radically undermine any possible ontology that one could theorize. And so I think that Hegel's big question is how can reality be structured such that a symbolic order emerges in it at all, right? I think that's an ontological question. How is reality structured such that this symbolic order emerged in it, right? And that's a common question, I mean, among plenty of thinkers who are just trying to face ontology. How did we become representational? How did production produce this place where we can represent the produced thing? And I think Hegel's answer is that there is a crack, there is this gap, there is this crack. Yeah, I think the symbolic order is a feature of consciousness. Yes, I think that this symbolic like apparatus, this symbolizing, this aspect or character of spirit. I don't even know if I want to say consciousness because it is an animal conscious, you know what I mean? But I know I'm very confident that spiritual life takes place in a symbolic order. And so there is a crack or a gap, and reality is not what is, but what in a way fails to be what it is. When things, okay, there's a term from Jean-Paul Sartre. He used this term called facticity, which is like the body of the thing. Yes, it's better to say a feature of spirit, I think. So the facticity of a thing is traversed by impossibility, and that allows it to exist. Common sense materialism would say that reality is this chaotic non-all which persists indifferently beyond understanding. But Hegel would say that the real, or reality, is not beyond us, but is this active negation, this like active continual negation of our attempt to present or presuppose a one. But that's the thing. The one is there at the beginning, unable to be what it is.
Can I pause you for a minute? So then I'm trying to relate that back to what you said earlier.
Yes.
About the egg and all of that. So then, I mean, is that what you're saying? So then, like the thing, whatever it is, or the concept, and I don't know what the relation between those two are, but the thing appears to be this, but then when you investigate it more carefully, or when you crack the shell, it turns out to be not that. And so is that what you mean by the impossibility of being what it is?
Yeah, at its core, it is not that. It is
Not that.
Yes.
And then I'm trying to then relate this to the dialectic. Then does that, the thing or idea or whatever you, thing doesn't seem like the right word, but whatever that is, then when the not thing emerges or becomes apparent, then do those two then sublate, and then the next something like, like I'm thinking, and I don't know if this is the way, I don't remember, or maybe I don't know if he said this or not, like when you were talking about materialism and so on, that formalism and then materialism, and then you said empiricism emerges. Well, empiricism, if you look at empiricism carefully, like Hume and Berkeley did, you end up with idealism, and which negates the existence of matter. And so, sort of ironically, those who believe that empirical experience is the basis of truth, if you follow that to its law, if you follow that if you carefully analyze that collapses into idealism. So Berkeley was an empiricist. I mean, he was a hard empiricist, and Berkeley ended up denying that there is any material world at all. And Hume was a hard empiricist and ended up, at the very least, remaining agnostic about the existence of the material world. Some people think he also denied it, but he was at least agnostic. And so that's what I'm trying to relate this to this, like the thing and the not thing, and then sublation, and then what happens? Like, how does this work in the dialectic process?
I think that you have these two things. You have this thing and its collapse. Formalism being the collapse of empiricism, empiricism being the collapse of formalism, or whatever. And what is then present is this. So you have the thing and its void, right? This thing and its void, this thing and its failure, or this thing and its opposite. And the only, well, I think that Hegel would say there's no middle option between formalism and empiricism. No real like thing that kind of pleases both parties. There's nothing to compromise. There's no compromise. Every mediator has already vanished, right? Mediators have already vanished by the time that we can think to look for one. It's this world of constant mediation without a mediator. But this is where I think that there are two ways to kind of word what happens in my mind. One way to word what happens is that formalism and empiricism, or term A and term B, are like the spears sharpening to the point that their antagonism is hyperbolized until the very formal framework of the problem explodes like a hydraulic press, and what is left is whichever one is less destroyed. And what that is a reintroduction of asymmetry, which is why in formalism and empiricism, I think that Hegel would always opt for formalism as having primacy in our productive intellectual investigations or analytic power. Exaggerated formalism breaks the symmetrical binary. That's a way to, there's this binary, there's this struggle, this radical empiricism, radical formalism. They're getting more and more radical, more and more extreme, and radical empiricism doesn't really do anything except keep elapsing. Radical formalism breaks the boundary. It breaks the frame. And how it does that is by, and this is the other way that I could look at this, either as two spears that are sharpening to each other to a point. This is the two ways that I see the dialectic, or two of the primary ways that I vision the dialectic. And that's the two spears sharpening until they explode, and then there's one left. And it's this sort of weird, and it's scraped and marked and scratched by the other. It's kind of like it's visibly, it's changed. It's a different spear. It's kind of shittier, or it's, you know, maybe it's only been made stronger by its battles, or you know what I mean? It's not quite the same. It doesn't leave the battle the same as it came in. So it's different. So the two spears sharpening and then exploding, and then the one being left. Or the other way that I would look at it is that you have this egg that cracks, it has its void inside of it, and then the only term left that is not the egg or the void is the difference between the two terms. The very difference between the egg and its void. Because as soon as I see this, like imagine my whole universe is just this, or I'm in this black void space room, and there's this little egg, and I imagine that it is the one thing, and it has this substantial hidden character. Oh my God. I break it open, I see that there's nothing inside of it. And what I then realize is that there are only two terms that I'm playing with here now. Egg and not egg. Egg and void. Well, how do I get past that impasse, this deadlock, this fundamental deadlock between what is eggshell versus what is not eggshell? And I think that Hegel would say, by pointing to this other term that you're not looking at, that's already there, but that you're not investigating enough, and that's the difference between the two. That is already present, this difference between the two terms. And this difference between the two terms is the seat of the reintroduction of asymmetry. Those two metaphors are basically the same thing, where it's a way that Hegel says this is that consciousness or spirit or the whatever realizes that the difference is on one side. That's a phrase he uses in his weird old-timey dialect. He says that the difference rests on one side. And for formalism and empiricism, both the words formalism and empiricism and the word and the very postulating or positing of the difference between the two, and this entire conversation that I'm having with all of you as I describe it using my mouth, it is all taking place on the frame of forms and formalism. And so the difference itself rests on one side, on formalism. And okay, so we can go through some basic ones like formalism versus empiricism. Eric, by the way, we're just kind of going back over kind of our interpretations of what the dialectic means, which I think, yeah, it's a good question to return to. It's important, I think, but it's one we could talk about forever, dude. But so formalism and empiricism, the difference between the two is a purely formal difference. That's a way to word that. Appearance versus essence. The difference between the two is a purely apparent difference. Things appear as essential. Appearance and essence both rest on the side of appearance. Formalism and empiricism both rest on the side of form. The whole thing is just contained within this one form, but that other thing, how the word sublation fits into your metaphorical illustrations. Well, I think that sublation, the way that I see sublation is like, it's the reason that pure formalism and yeah, it's like we talked about, the two spears sharpen, and they're pristine and brand new. It's pure, unadulterated, unfettered formalism with no contaminants. It's just pure formality. And then pure, uncontaminated empiricism. And the two, go at it. And then the explosion occurs. Formalism still stands after the hydraulic press has smashed them together. Empiricism is crumbled on one side. Formalism still stands, but that spear, that formal spear, is not the same as it was. It is scratched or broken or chipped, or perhaps it's got a divot in it now at the tip of itself. It's got a divot at the front. So now anytime empiricism comes towards it, it's got a divot, and its weight is distributed such that it'll explode it every time, you know. And that's it after having sublated the past terms. And that's why there's a difference between, like we said at the beginning, pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated formalism and what I think is the result of that dialectical process. Because you don't end with just pure, unadulterated formalism again. You end with what a lot of people would call, and I know this sounds strange, but formal materialism. A genuinely formal materialism, a place where there is formal matter and a material form. The distinction between form and matter disappears as their relationship is purely formal and they are formal, but you don't just have pure formalism, you have this admission of the functionality or the presence of the failures or the void of form. You have this recognition or this sublation of the void or the failures of formalism, to where formalism is no longer just pure, unadulterated, absolute formalism, but is this material formalism, where you have this materialism that's grounded in a lack of matter, a materialism oriented around forms and quanta and waves. Sublation is the explosion and the scars left on the surviving term. And those scars are not, and this is kind of the beauty, or this is where I think people get the idea of the culminating. It's not left weaker by the explosion. The only thing that healed its wound was the spear which smote it. You know, it's left stronger by the battle. It is in a way, at the very least, it is more, or at least, okay, the formal enunciation of the term is more inclusive of those things that we talked about. You know how I said all these movements that he makes throughout the book of like, this is kind of true, this is kind of true, this is kind of true, sublate, sublate, sublate. I think that the key of the sublating thing is what I talked about last week when I said it feels like all of this book is him saying like, okay, there are 1,000,001 theories as to what the fuck is going on with all this shit, all this dense theoretical discussion. And all of these different viewpoints have something to say that is true. And I can't just say that it's not true. I mean, I guess I could argue that all day, but there's something to what they're saying that is true. And I have to reckon with that. I have to include that. I have to admit to myself that what they said is true. And the only way that I'm going to get past this deadlock is by accepting what they say is true and then pushing forward towards further truth. Not by rejecting them and saying you're wrong and stupid and this existent idea is the end. It's the right thing. It's the truth. It's done. We're done. I have to take it's like a, you know, it's like from the perspective of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like from the perspective of a leftist where, let's say, Rush Limbaugh is, you know, talking about how, you know, Americans want this and people like that, and American people are this, that, and the other thing. And I could say, as a leftist, you're wrong. People actually want universal health care or I don't know, the 5 basic necessities of the Leninist government in Soviet Russia. That's what they really want. I could just say that all day. But what I should instead do is, if I'm going to do anything functional, I'm going to say, it seems like Rush Limbaugh's reaching a lot of fucking people. People seem to agree with what he's saying. There seems to be some element of what he's saying that is resonant, that is true. And the only way that I'm going to actually win people over is if I don't just hand wave or shut off my ears, but I take it in and I say, okay, Rush, you're right in a very limited sense. in a very, and let's keep, and now that we can get this kind of spirit of agreement here, you are correct. You seem to know what the people want. You are a disc jockey. You're popular. You seem to have some sense of what the people are looking for. And people seem to agree with you. Let's take that and really figure out what's going on with it, and why it's true, and what part of it is true, and what part of it is not so true, and what part of it is I can actually move away from, but what part of it am I not allowed to move away from? It feels like this movement is this constant, yeah, I need to identify where the baby is and where the bathwater begins. You know what I mean? Like, I got to figure out what's going on. I got to, and that's my job as a dialectician or as an analyst or as a theorist, is to figure out where baby meets bathwater, and why, or I guess how I can move forward without any postnatal abortions, I guess, any accidental, screw ups of throwing away something salient or important or necessary for my progress, and that's why I think Hegel's being super, what I would call persnickety, he's being super careful to try not to miss anything, because he's trying to say, like, I can reasonably disagree with those guys over there because I recognize that there are parts of what they're saying that are true. But even if you accept that parts of what they're saying are true, X is still the case. You know what I mean? And then you can say, well, what about X? Is X the case? Well, there are parts of X that are definitely true, but Y is still the case, And he's just doing that, you know what I mean? And that's what I feel sublation is. It is like, and that's formalism and empiricism. Formalism says, you know what? There is a functional character to the notion of matter and to the underlying structure of materialism, which is contingency and indeterminacy. I can totally get behind that. Sure, those are important, necessary characters of experience. But that does not mean that our analysis is reducible to a materialist one or to a empiricist one, I can say that they're saying some true stuff that I have to account for within my system if my system is going to work. But yeah, and then this line of thinking just kind of goes down this path where that seems like it would be culminating, like we would be getting truer and truer and truer as time goes on, right? I would just be accumulating truths. But I think that, like I said before, one of the key parts of what's going on is this unorientable dimension to the dialectic, which is that it's not necessarily progressing towards some omega point, but that there is this constant, yes, we're always chasing after something that is more true and more true and more true. And this is where I think Matt and I were coming from, Nevitt, in the Meaning of Life class, where I said that the eternal identity, that's a term that Hegel uses, the formation of the eternal identity is the basis from which I can say that there are certain things in my present day that are eternally true, like science and math. Science or logic and mathematics, that's a better one. Logic and mathematics are things that many very important philosophers have debated for centuries. Was it discovered or was it created? Did we find out that the universe was actually like this, or did we project it? And Hegel would say, yeah, I mean, ultimately, because it's part of this formal thing, you could say that we projected it, right? But like we created it, but we only created it in a way such that the instant that it appears to us, it appears as if it had always already been there. And so from our perspective, from our contingent, contemporary, historicized moment in time, there are eternal truths. And the notion of something that is eternally true is this dynamic moving thing that changes as time goes on. And this is a little bit harder to argue and get into more nitty gritty stuff that I don't necessarily want to go down right now. But this is where Matt was saying, where it's like, I could defensively say, as a proponent of contemporary ideas, I could say that in our present day, this is not necessarily to say that this is the case, but I could say this, that rape and murder of women is wrong. I can say that the rape and the murder of women is a bad thing, or that it is wrong. And I can further say that way back yonder, back when your grandpappy or whatever was doing it, or when he was being racist or abusive to subjugated peoples like women and minorities, it was wrong then too. I can look back and I can say, yeah, it's wrong now, and it was most certainly wrong then. Math is true now, and it was most certainly true then. Logic is present now, and it was most certainly present then. It was wrong to rape and murder women before there was even women. You know what I mean? Like, in a way, that it's the owl of Minerva flying at night. Now I've seriously talked for yeah, that's enough. I am done. Somebody please take the mic. I need the hook from like the Apollo Theater to pull me off stage and yank me away. Seriously, geez.
Office, get a shepherd's crook. You're right next to him, so if you could actually. Honestly, I don't have a lot yeah, that is Kant. And I don't know, I put that there because that was the way Hunter was describing math, and I do think it's consistent from what I understand from Hegel, but I think it's very consistent with Kant's position. Again, transcendentally ideal, but empirically real. And maybe Hegel's doing something and fleshing it out. I wanted to say this, and where I came in was kind of in the middle of, formalism, empiricism. And you were discussing, how, the difference lies on one side. And I want to say, yes, this is Hegel's idealism. The difference lies on the side of formalism, right? Where materialism is a formal term. It's an abstraction. But here's my point. It's an abstraction, right? So formalism and empiricism are both abstractions. And so the difference falls on the side of formalism. I want to say this is a feature of Hegel's idealist posture. Materialist dialectics kind of puts it the other way, right? In the conflict between empiricism and formalism, the difference lies on the side of empiricism, where these abstractions are ways of expressing differences that actually reside in the material and are immanent to the material, but in the process of understanding, we have to go through abstractions, and so they appear, as if the abstraction were the most fundamental, right? But so I want to say, in a materialist dialectics inspired by Hegel, you take a lot of the same mechanisms, but you kind of invert them, right? And in this case, a materialist dialectics, in that conflict between formalism and empiricism, the difference between them resides on the sides of empiricism, and the abstractions, the truths of the abstractions are actually immanent in the material. That's what I understand anyway,
It seems to me that like conceptuality for Hegel is literally the opposite of what we would normally consider abstract.
When everything's driving kind of towards a unity of thought and being, it does seem like concepts eventually become objects and objects eventually become objects. I don't think that the identity is strict there. It's more along the lines of you see the concept as an object and you see the object as a concept, but you don't collapse them into a single identity, right? There's a speculative identity when you see the aspect of one and the other and the aspect of the other and in the other, right? But you don't necessarily have to collapse them into a singular identity. But I want to say, like, the idealist part of Hegel is to stress the concept as object aspect of it, right? And then the object as concept is what allows a connection to take place. But the emphasis and the priority is on concept, insofar as we're idealist. That said, again, Hegel is an idealist, but I want to say he's also barely an idealist. Of the German idealists, I want to say he's the one that investigates the material with the most fidelity.
Ooh, fidelity, good use. That was a good use.
Yeah, we've been throwing that term around. I'm glad but yeah, actually, I think that I said this. I said this in the chat a little bit, but like, yeah, I think that Hegel sets up this sort of idealism, right? Which then dialectical materialism tries to break away from, right? Which is, and I mean the dialectical materialism of like the late 19th century, early 20th century, where you had people like, it's, that's funny, Nevin. You have people like Joseph Stalin advocating dialectical materialism, which is this I'd say this break away, this desperate break away from Hegel's dialectical or absolute idealism, but I think that what's interesting, I guess, about Zizek's project, and this is just kind of an aside, is that he calls himself a dialectical materialist by saying that he engages with like pure formalism, there's a disappearance of matter in a network of formal relations. There's this disappearance of matter in a network of formal relations, like Hegel, like where Hegel is saying there's this network of conceptual and formal relations where the notion of matter kind of doesn't mean a whole lot anymore, except for its formal meaning. But how is this even a materialism, right? Because Hegel would say it's not. But Zizek would say, oh, tut, tut, I think it is. Zizek would say, I think this could be a materialism because the movement of this abstract immateriality is totally contingent and purposeless. And therefore, the immaterial is not some infinite depth of obscene vitality like in Blue Velvet when he shoots the bugs with the camera at the beginning of the movie. He zooms in on bugs. It's not some infinite depth of obscene vitality, but it's this totally non-spiritual immateriality, this extra physical, immaterial, metaphysical, beyond realm, right? And Zizek is like, yes, but that is a totally non-spiritual thing. It is soulless, it is sad, it is a thing that embraces contingency and abandons any sense of naive concepts of evolution or development or progression, and evolutionary materialism is like the opposite of this, which is people like Steven Pinker and Joseph Stalin. You know what I mean? Where like Joseph Stalin thinks that we are materially evolving towards the grand revolution or the communist world society or whatever. And Steven Pinker thinks that we are materially evolving towards a better, more peaceful society.
No,
You
but
know what I mean?
Stalin was basing part of what he was saying, obviously, on Lenin, but also, do you ever hear of Lysenko, who was the preeminent Soviet biologist for decades? And Lysenko's experiments suggested that changes to a biological organism from its environment could be passed on genetically to its offspring. And so that gave a very powerful foundation for Stalin's gigantic social engineering to say we can create the new socialist man. And if you look at Mussolini, who also came from the socialist tradition, before World War I, he was the editor of the Socialist Party of Italy's newspaper Avanti. He talked about the creation of a new fascist man. So there was this impulse in both fascism and Soviet Marxism that the environment, literally, not only could you alter the behavior, but more importantly, the actual biology of human beings.
And this is where I think, people are coming from in saying, like, this sort of materialism that you and I are kind of discuss, this frame that you point out as being present in both, this the Mussolini project, when he broke off from the socialists and started his kind of started drumming up support in like that little paramilitary outfit in Italy. And as Stalin was making his moves after the death of Lenin, it's this face of materialism, of the most hardcore, radical, absolute materialism. This is just science. This is, you would tell them that this is ridiculous, and they would say, this is just the way the world works. You're just a naive fool. This is how, sorry, buddy, but science and math and biology and truth and reality, it has this to say, right? And it's that there is this progress or whatever, but like that stance is mostly a mask for, like, or most often it is a mask for, I think, like the worst kind of idealism, the worst kind, or one of the worst kinds of unproductive, naive idealism, like Steven Pinker and Sam Harris, who think that we are getting to a point where we are like more peaceful than we've ever been, and our world is better and nicer and happier than it's ever been. And it's like, and Zizek's main point is like, think about the world before World War I. Like, trade was booming, you know what I mean? And people's expectations were growing, and their demands were growing, you know what I mean? Growing subterranean tension, you know what I mean? That will explode and cut off any of your illusory progress. But yeah.
Yeah, and never mind, Auschwitz and Hiroshima and this, the stockpile of nuclear weapons that are still hanging over everybody's head like an atomic Damocles sword. But we're getting more peaceful, guys. It's all better. We're realizing the better angels of our nature. To me, that's just, it's pure ideology, right? I wanted to ask the question, Ed. You talked about Lysenkoism. Is that thoroughly discredited? Because and again, I'm not a biologist. I don't have a background in genetics. I can't. But I heard on the radio, and I was suspicious. Okay, I don't believe everything NPR tells me. But it was a couple of years ago. There was a report, and we have now discovered that the generations of oppression that African Americans suffered was actually passed on through their DNA, and the people living today who are descendants of those slaves are actually carrying genetic modifications which bear the traces of an oppressed people. Like, they're more prone to depression and such and such. So
right. Well, I mean, the reason, obviously Lysenko runs into Mendel's genetics, right? Recessive genes, that there's a material basis in our DNA, in our bodies to pass on the physical characteristics. But there's at least statistical evidence suggesting that trauma to a pregnant woman, whatever the pregnant woman is going through, can actually have both physical and psychological, can be passed on to the baby, the person after birth, that they can trace, and it's not just alcoholism, obviously, but other things that happen during the pregnancy actually seem to show up with when people are studied medically, both the physical and the psychological.
So here's my non-scientific explanation of epigenetics. Lamarckism, which it sounds like this Russian guy was borrowing from. Lamarck said that the sex cells, in other words, what we would call today genes, are modified by the behavior of adults, such that the experiences they have as adults modify their sex genes, which then therefore have an effect on their children. So this was the inheritance of acquired characteristics. So, you know, you have these acquired characteristics through life, and those acquired characteristics modify your genetic material, which then you pass on to your children. Epigenetics is not Lamarckian. So what my understanding of the way epigenetics works is the theory is, and I say theory, I don't know how much, maybe this has been confirmed, I don't know. It's not that the behavior of adults literally generate new genetic material or alter existing genetic material. What happens is experiences in life turn on or off already existing genetic material. So in other words, the theory is like with the World War II thing, that sometime in the evolutionary past, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, the species went through long period of starvation and, you know, lack of resources. And because of those sorts of experiences over, again, a really long period of time, you know, generations, not a single lifetime, that some of the physiological coping mechanisms that allowed those people to survive became encoded into the genes. So, you know, those who could survive on less food and those who could survive on less fat, that stuff actually made it, you know, became part of genetic programming because natural selection. Those who had those genes survived and those who didn't. But then what happens is, as later in time, when those stresses are no longer in the environment, and I don't understand the biological mechanisms, but those genes get turned off. And I heard a discussion of what that means in terms of, you know, the chemicals involved and such, but those genetic sequences get deactivated. And so they don't have an effect on offspring for a very long time. But then what happens, you have something like World War II, where you had a lot of people who were under extreme stress. And what happens is those inactive genetic mechanisms are reactivated because of the existing environmental stresses that were similar to those in the past. And then those the genes that are reactivated get passed on as reactivated into their children. So it's not rapid evolution, which is what Lamarck thought. You know, Lamarck thought that you literally, that the experiences of an adult would make it directly into the genetic material of the children. It's not that. It's that the genetic material that got there the same way that, you know, that conventional theory says, just got inactivated because environmental conditions changed. So sorry for that long explanation, but I just get worried, you know, when people hear that and then they say, oh, well, you know, now Lamarck was right, you can inherit acquired characteristics. That's not really true. And there's, you know, who knows what all kind of weird hidden shit there is in our genome that might get turned on in some, you know, like if the world goes into a deep freeze, you know, who knows what kind of, we all may get super fat, you know, and because we need the fat, or I don't know, you know, things like that could happen.
Well, I'm ahead of the game then, and, you know, too bad for Hunter and Travis.
Yeah, me and Ed are going to be just fine, you skinny dudes. In fact, you know, when it gets cold and my family's shivering in the living room, I'm like, I'm just fine. I've got plenty of heat here and heat retention on that. So, I
feel like I need to align myself with Team Fat Guy here because I'm in no way skinny. So.
Team Skinny soccer player here.
Yeah, Eric and Travis and I can fit through small spaces. We can hide under smaller objects. We can cloak our appearance much more easily.
Be a survivor in the zombie apocalypse. Oh yeah.
Come on.
We'll be the first ones to go.
It just depends on which kind of horrible doomsday apocalypse happens.
Like which one, like a Romero classic zombie, or are we talking like, you know, 28 Days Later?
God, I hope not 28 Days Later. I hate those fast zombies.
Yeah, the fast ones, I'm boned, man.
I hate. Fuck those guys. I saw Eric in person here for the first time a while back, and I was like, man, this guy is like an elegant sharp looking guy.
Oh, thank you.
I would use the word sexy. I can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah, yeah.
You were taller than I expected you to be. Like, wow, he's pretty tall there. So I had a thought earlier this morning. It's kind of off the topic we were just on, but it's Hegel related. It's very much Hegel related. So I thought I'd share. And it is just a small thing. And it's, pursuant to what is the meaning of sublation. And again, I think in Hegel, if you look closely, the mechanism of sublation it varies, right? But at least one inspiration, I'm almost certain of it, in Hegel's mind as he's formulating or developing his concept, alphabet, is the status of the law in Hebraic scripture, and then what Jesus does in his intervention sublates the law, I believe, right? It both cancels but upholds it, preserves it in a higher sense. And I'm fairly certain in some of Hegel's early writings, there was a lot of like theological investigation, and I know one of them, he goes specifically into Moses and the Hebraic law. So I can't help but think that was one of the, the inspiring ideas it was the role of Jesus as sublating the law that helped, that inspired him in his development of his concept of sublation.
He didn't
That's
want to use the word transcending.
Sorry?
He may not have wanted to use the word transcendent, because of its religious connotations. Sublating would be more, I don't know, I don't want to say hidden, but more
I think
indirect.
it's also important that almost everybody here has talked about, has mentioned this. There's a preservative effect of sublating as well. So it's not merely lifting off and becoming transcendent, but that, I use the word sedimentation, which Hunter kind of gave me a vague, yeah, I kind of like that. That, there's in contemporary philosophical circles of some kind, there's this idea of sedimentation, that these different things kind of get sedimented and layered on top of one another. And so they're no longer as active as they were, but they're also not annihilated or transcended. They're still kind of there, and they exert an influence. Kind of like with, Hunter's spear analogy, the scars of the conflict are still are left there. And you're not left with just the pristine original thing, but you've got these modifications that are preserved. And no matter what else happens, whatever other dialectical process goes on, those are always going to still be there. They're always kind of preserved. So I think, it has that sense too.
Reminds me of when we read Nietzsche, and I can't remember like exactly what Nietzsche had to say, but I just remember talking about kind of this idea that, like, when you sort of reject something or move on or decide that something's not true, you can't sort of completely leave that behind. The fact that you are rejecting it means that you are giving it credit, that it is something that stays with you. And I use the example of sort of religion and Christianity, of sort of rejecting Christianity, but also knowing that it will never not be a part of me, that I will see things in this Christian lens, that that I have to sort of actively reject it because it is a part of me. And that rejection is a sort of respect to it. It's like that thing. It's not something that I can ignore. Rather, the fact that I reject it gives it meaning. It means that it is something worthwhile, something that has strengthened me as a person by sort of me rejecting it.
Well, that's even within Christianity. Protestantism looks like it does because it was a rejection of Catholicism. It would have looked different if it was reacting against Eastern Orthodox Christian faith. And you were saying also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just interesting when Travis was talking, I was thinking too about like depression and addiction issues and anxiety. It's like the sublation in terms of that in a modern sense would be interesting, because it's like you can't reject that part of you. You have to preserve it. And if you try to isolate it from you or lift off of it, or it's like cutting a piece of you out. So it's in a way, like I struggle with that. Like it has to define. It doesn't have to define you, but you still have to keep it. So I was thinking about that in terms of depression as well.
Yeah, I very much relate to that in terms of like addiction and talking to people about addiction. I think it's like, you know, it's not something like, I think that the more you sort of hate yourself for doing it, or sort of see that addiction as something that you know you don't want to be a part of you, I think it strengthens that addiction. I think that it sort of gives it more of a hold over you, because you sort of you can't accept the fact that you're doing it and at all, you know. It yeah, I don't know. I guess I see that as like something culturally that I sort of am inclined to reject, is this idea that, you know, it's like you are addicted to something, then you go to rehab, and then you are no longer addicted to it, you know, and you have left that person
Yes.
behind, and you've moved on or whatever, you know, and then you hear about people becoming addicted again, and then go, you know, in this cycle. And it's like, you know, I think that is a good example, because it's like you can never sort of leave that behind, you know. I think you constantly sort of have to fight for that. And you know, being sober, it's like, you know, I don't think that 10 years later it's like you don't have to think about it anymore, you know. I think that it sort of remains a part of your life forever. And I think people who have been sober for a very long time recognize that, you know. But yeah, I definitely relate to that.
Because I was just watching, and then I know I don't want to go too over, but I was just, have you seen the series Channel Zero at all? The horror series? There's a season 4, which is amazing, where two people struggle with addiction, and it's personified as a centipede inside them, two sisters, and the villain removes it from both of them, but the hero, the moment of definition in the series is when the one sister becomes something else without that centipede in her, and the other one actually ingests it to get back to who she is, like owning the addiction issue, owning the anxiety and the depression. Like it's still there, it's not something she wants, but to remove it is to change her very fundamental being, if that is even present. So that's what I kind of look at with sublation in that regards. And yeah, we should definitely have a conversation outside of this group about addiction and stuff too, because like so many of the programs I think are like, yeah, as soon as you try to remove that core of you, I struggle with that too. Sorry, I don't mean to get too personal. I apologize. I know we're talking about Hegel.
That's
No, I love it. Keep doing it.
you know, Travis's comments about Nietzsche remind me of a couple of things. One is, I've mentioned this recently, maybe it was in the other seminar, I can't remember, but in Zarathustra, a hunchback comes to him and asks him to heal him, because some people say that Zarathustra is like a parody of the Gospels, not a parody as in making fun of, but as in kind of inverting in some ways. And Zarathustra is kind of a Christ figure, you know, who healed people. But when the hunchback asks Zarathustra to heal him, Zarathustra refuses, because he says, this is who you are, and it is this condition that has made you into who you are. And so you should take this condition and work with it, and, you know, and not reject it and not try to get rid of it, but be the hunchback, because that's part of who you are. And the other thing that Travis's comment reminded me is, you know, I've heard people say, I think I've said this here a number of times, that Nietzsche never bothered to criticize people that he thought were just sort of stupid, or that he didn't have much respect for. Like he says almost nothing about Mill, because, you know, why bother? But he, at least in Nietzsche's estimation, but he just beats up on Socrates and Plato over and over and over. And so this sublating talk made me think, it's like, you know, it's like Plato is like, and Socrates both are like something he keeps trying to, you know, sublate. He keeps pushing him into the soil, and they're like some kind of oily substance that just somehow kind of keeps rising to the surface. And then he throws another layer of gravel on it, and then it just keeps rising to the surface. And so his philosophy has these probably certain characteristics because he's working so hard against Plato and Socrates, just like Travis said, that his philosophy bears the marks, like the spear thing, maybe it bears the marks of this constant dialogue with this stuff he doesn't like, but he can't escape.
Yeah, I just want to say in response to Joseph about talking personally. I mean, I don't know. I think sometimes I get lost in sort of the philosophical talk. I enjoy it. I mean, I really do think that I learn a lot, and like I know a lot more about sort of philosophers and stuff like that. I just feel like a lot of the time, like I don't have the information to talk about it, I guess, or the background or all that, and that's, I mean, maybe that's bullshit. Maybe I do. And I'm just kind of afraid to talk about it because it feels like it's so much bigger than me, or, but, I think that for me, like the only way that I can conceive of Hegel is through the personal things. And I see it throughout everything, I mean, I see like aspects of experience throughout what Hegel's talking about. And I guess I maybe don't relate as much to the approach and this attempt to, like philosophically, like really acknowledge everything, and all and all that stuff. I respect it, I really do. But I think that I relate to it less, and I've talked to Hunter about, I think, our approaches, are very different, and but at the same time, I very much respect what Hunter's doing, in the same way I respect what Hegel's doing. I just think that there is sort of this inclination in me to relate to sort of this conversation about like depression and how that relates to what sublation is and all this stuff, so I'm not saying that that's what this seminar should be or anything like that, but I really don't. I really value it and I appreciate it, and it I guess it allows me to sort of speak in a way that feels more natural, I guess, whatever that means. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about this group is like when there's an ability to be earnest and honest, and it's met even with heated discussion and whatnot. Like it's such an educational experience for me, but also therapeutic in a way. So, and also Eric, holy crap, you were tall. I didn't realize how tall you were until you stood up. It's like you are extremely tall, dude.
Wait, no,
That's awesome.
I thought I remember Eric being surprisingly short. Hold on, Eric.
Really?
How tall are you?
I don't think you can tell on Zoom.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I would say I'm slightly below average. I'm 5'10".
You're 5 how? What? Oh, you're
There's
5.
no
oh,
way
oh.
you're 5'10".
Wait, no, I am too. Well, shit, Eric.
Hey, me too.
Hey, yeah, hey,
What's up?
5'10" gang.
All right.
I was going to say that, one of the complaints about a lot of contemporary philosophy, but even philosophy, like, I guess the whole, I don't know, just lots of philosophy, is that it's so abstract. And one of the features of classic Greek philosophy, maybe Roman too, I'm not as familiar with it, was that Greek philosophy was supposed to be, at least parts of it were supposed to be integrated with life, and it was supposed to be how to practice life, and ethics was not just a narrow moral thing. It was how to live the good life in a really broad sense. What is the good human life? So, I think bringing some of these ideas into everyday experience and implications, it is, when we can anyway. I mean, sometimes it's kind of hard, like with the transcendental ego, but with some of this stuff, if we can find ways to sort of integrate it with existence and experience, I think I like that aspect of the ancient tradition, is that it's more about or at least a part of, I mean, I have no problem just being in my head for hours at a time, but I'm not sure that's completely healthy. So
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think Hegel is like, I don't know, I think he's interacting with stuff that has, I don't know, it's kind of like, you know, Chase was talking about with like language and kind of this argument that like, you know, I had said something about like that language, that we're trying to like reach these feelings, and language is kind of like the better we're able to talk about whatever we're saying, the further away we get from like what we're actually feeling or discussing, you know. But there is this element to where like we have been like speaking and using language for so long that there is an element of just like that is beyond that, you know, that of language that isn't trying to describe a feeling, that just sort of exists in the world and is like, and I don't think I'm explaining it that well, but I think that Hegel is sort of interacting with that same way in philosophy. You know, it's like, I think that philosophy is at this point existed for so long that it exists sort of, I don't know, in this realm outside of experience, you know, and he is trying to sort of bridge that, you know, bring experience to philosophy and put them together rather than just describe sort of experience in a philosophical way. You know, and it was like I think Eric mentioned like Finnegan's Wake as being kind of a thing of language, in terms of like, you know, it's interacting with language sort of in its own realm, I guess. I don't know, you know, but I think that was a good point that Chase made, and I've been thinking about that sort of in my own desire to talk about feelings and all that, you know.
Yeah, I think Hegel was up against a very different. This is the last thing I want to say, and then that's it. That's it. Nobody else. That's a joke. If anybody has anything to say, please. I know Travis likes to leave at 7. No, see, now I'm patching the blame off to you. Anyway, I initially unmuted so that I could say this. I think I'm just going to say this first. I think that Hegel did something that no one had ever done before and that no one has been able to do since. What one succinct word or name for that thing I can't give you. That thing that he did, this project he practiced, or this goal he tried to reach, I can't say in precise, succinct terms exactly what it is. Oh, don't worry about it, Joseph. But yeah. But I think that Hegel recognized that his own efforts contributed to a problem that he was trying to solve. I think that he saw that every word that he wrote down defeated its own purpose, which was to try and make this make sense. And I doubt very, very, very heavily that he finished it and read it and said, yeah, that makes sense. Perfect. Fantastic. I'm so glad. I finally got just the right words, you know? I think that he saw himself as in doing the only thing that he knew how to do, in trying to solve this problem in a way with more dedication and with more attention and more effort and more sincerity and more abstract theoretical pontificating than I think anybody had ever done or will ever do again. I think that he, maybe the future's open, but has ever done since. I think he really tried to do something where he knew that the logic he was laying out defeated itself. And so the only way to make it function, to still give it that functional intervention, is to insist, I think, on 2 points. One being that the problem is already the solution. And I think that he realized that, and that gave him what he needed to do this, to do this crazy. I see him writing the Phenomenology of Spirit like how you see an episode of the Dukes of Hazzard. It's like, how's he gonna get out of this bucket of syrup? It's like he's just a good old boy getting down to some trouble. I see this as just this project, this self-aware project of self-defeat and self-negation and of sacrifice and rejection of his entire world and of his entire life, wrapped up into this book that no human being could ever relate to. You know what I mean? No intuitive, intimate, emotional, beautiful, ooey gooey, kissy, whisper, sweet nothings type mood or mode could ever relate to this. And he knew that, and I don't think that he saw tenderness and love and beauty and poetry as being stupid or wastes of time. But that this is not that, and this is not wrong because of that. This is worth something still, and I really admire, with every part of my heart and soul, I admire his willingness to do this.
To follow on what Hunter just said, I mean, that's what my secondary reading, that was my sense, that Hegel was, I don't want to say admitting and accepting, because that sounds like it's tepid, like he's tolerating these other approaches of knowing. It's not that. He realizes that human beings experience the world, express that experience, express that understanding through different mediums. And so poetry is telling us something that can be very valuable, but it's going to tell us something in a way that's different from philosophy, right? And that there's all of these attempts of human beings to understand the world and their place in it, and they have value.
Well, we did not actually get to the text, but anyway, I found the conversation extremely helpful, and Hunter's explanations really helpful, and I'm glad he was willing to entertain my questions. So, because I still am struggling with some of the really basic stuff, and so I apologize to anyone who is unhappy that we didn't get to the text, but I found it very very useful to me personally. So I appreciate it, and thank you, Hunter, for willing to try different ways to explain these really difficult ideas, and thank you, Eric, for giving us what you know, because you guys know more than we do.
What about me?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank
Travis,
you,
you don't know
Travis.
shit.
Yeah, Travis, you know what? Actually, fuck you, Travis. No, I just thank you, Travis. I think, yeah, for insisting. And you know what? It's not because of your feelings, all right? That's not the part I'm thanking you for. It's your insistence. It's your stick-to-itiveness. It's that spirit I admire and I appreciate, and it brings me to new places.
Well, I appreciate his feelings. So what you admire him for really doesn't matter to me. Just saying, because of my subjectivity, that's what I'm really happy about for Travis today.
So I was gonna mention, I got an email from YMCA yesterday. I found out that I will be coaching and doing practices on Fridays at 5 p.m.
Oh, fuck.
Right, I know, I just got stuck with it. But so my thinking is, I can usually get back before 6:30 or 6:40. I'll jump on at the end for the next 9 weeks. Yeah, it sucks.
Sorry.
It sucks.
I didn't mean to. I was excited because it wasn't Tuesday, and then I realized.
Yeah.
Well, hey, at least we'll be able to talk about the Grant and Star cause on Tuesday.
Oh, yeah, I'll see you on Tuesday for the Grant and Star.
Isn't it on Monday?
Oh yeah. Sorry. We have changed it to Tuesday because Chase and Jackson. We talked about it last time. Does Tuesday work for you, Ed?
What time?
Same time.
Oh, the 6 to 8. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be fine.
Okay, great. Yeah,
I'll
that was
send out an email message to that email list.
yeah, because everyone else it worked. I realized you, yeah, you probably didn't see because it was on the Discord, but yeah. All right, cool. Then yeah,
Okay.
Tuesday. I'll confirm with everyone too. But
Okay, bye-bye.
see ya.
All right, I have to pee. Goodbye, everybody. That's it. Bye.
Caring.
Woo. Yeah.